Private Robert Miller was just 19, barely a man, when he arrived in Vietnam. He'd grown up on a farm in Iowa, dreaming of adventure, of making a difference. The brochures made it seem so noble, so important. But the reality was a world away from those glossy images. The air hung thick and heavy, a blanket of humidity that clung to everything. The jungle pressed in on all sides, a wall of green that seemed to watch, to wait. The sounds were constant, the whine of insects, the chatter of unseen creatures, and always the distant rumble of artillery. Fear was a constant companion, a knot in his stomach that never seemed to loosen. Miller clutched his rifle, his knuckles white. He tried to remember his training, the drills they'd run over and over back at Fort Benning. But nothing could have prepared him for this. The heat, the fear, the sheer alienness of it all. He missed his mom's apple pie, his dad's quiet advice, the familiar comfort of his small town. His unit was on patrol, pushing through the dense undergrowth. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He knew they were walking into danger, that the Viet Cong could be anywhere, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He tried to focus, to stay alert, but his mind kept drifting back home, to a simpler, safer time. He wondered if he would ever see Iowa again. He thought about his girlfriend, Sarah, and the promise he made to write her every day. He hadn't written in a week. The guilt gnawed at him. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his hand trembling slightly. He swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising panic. He was a soldier, he told himself. He had a duty to perform. But deep down, he was just a scared kid, lost in a war he didn't understand. And the jungle was waiting. The jungle's silence was a lie. One moment, the air was still, heavy with humidity. The next, it exploded. The crackle of automatic weapons fire ripped through the trees, followed by the thud of grenades. The ambush had begun. Miller dove for cover behind a thick banyan tree, his heart pounding in his chest. He fumbled with his rifle, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip it. Around him, chaos reigned. Soldiers screamed, bullets whizzed past, tearing through leaves and branches. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the sickeningly sweet odor of burning vegetation. He saw Johnson, a kid from his company, go down, clutching his stomach. He tried to crawl towards him, but a hail of bullets forced him back. He squeezed his eyes shut, praying. He wasn't ready to die. He returned fire, blindly spraying bullets into the jungle, hoping to hit something, anything. He didn't know where the enemy was, only that they were all around him, hidden in the dense foliage. He felt a sharp sting in his arm and realized he'd been hit. He ignored it, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The firing intensified. The Viet Cong were pressing their attack, moving closer. Miller knew they were outnumbered, outgunned. Their position was hopeless. He saw Sergeant Davis, their squad leader, shouting orders, trying to rally the men. But it was no use. The ambush was too well planned, too devastating. He peeked out from behind the tree, trying to get a fix on the enemy. He saw a flash of movement, a glint of sunlight on metal. He raised his rifle, took aim, and fired. He saw the figure fall. But there were so many more. He knew it was only a matter of time before they were overrun. He closed his eyes again, waiting for the end. He thought of his family, his friends, his life back home. He whispered a prayer, a plea for mercy. Then, he opened his eyes, determined to fight to the last. A searing pain ripped through Miller's leg. He cried out, collapsing to the ground. He looked down and saw a gaping wound, blood gushing out. He tried to staunch the flow with his hand, but it was no use. He was losing blood fast. The world began to spin. He felt lightheaded, nauseous. He knew he was in serious trouble. He tried to crawl back behind the tree, but his leg wouldn't cooperate. Every movement sent waves of agony through him. The firing continued, but it sounded distant, muffled. He could hear the shouts of his comrades, the screams of the wounded, but it was as if he were listening through a thick wall. He was fading. He saw Sergeant Davis crawl over to him, his face grim. Miller, hang in there, he shouted over the din. We've called for a medevac. They'll be here soon. Miller tried to smile, but his lips wouldn't move. He knew the chances of a medevac arriving in time were slim. The area was too hot, too dangerous. No pilot in their right mind would risk landing in the middle of a firefight. He closed his eyes, surrendering to the darkness. He saw flashes of his life, his childhood on the farm, his high school graduation, his first date with Sarah. He regretted all the things he hadn't done, all the things he would never do. He felt a hand on his shoulder shaking him gently. Miller, stay with me, Sergeant Davis urged. Don't give up. Miller opened his eyes, focusing on Davis's face. He saw the worry in his eyes, the determination. He knew Davis wouldn't leave him behind. He took a deep breath, fighting back the pain. He had to stay alive. He had to make it home. For his family, for Sarah, for himself. He wouldn't let the jungle claim him. Not today. He clung to that thought, a tiny spark of hope in the overwhelming darkness. The radio crackled to life. Sergeant Davis grabbed it, his face etched with worry. This is Davis, do you read? We need immediate medevac. Miller is critically wounded. A gruff voice responded. Davis, this is Eagle One. We copy. What's your location and situation? Davis rattled off their coordinates, his voice urgent. We're pinned down, heavy fire, multiple casualties. Miller's losing blood fast. We need immediate extraction. A pause. Eagle One to Davis. We're receiving heavy fire in your area. Pilots are refusing to land. Too hot. We can't authorize a medevac at this time. Repeat, medevac denied. Davis's face fell. Negative, Eagle One. You don't understand. Miller won't make it. He's a good kid. We need that bird. Davis, stand down. We can't risk a chopper and crew for one man. It's a war, Davis. We all make sacrifices. Davis slammed the radio down, his hands trembling. He looked at Miller, lying pale and still on the ground. He couldn't accept it. He wouldn't let Miller die. He grabbed the radio again, his voice desperate. Eagle One, this is Davis. I'm requesting permission to bypass chain of command. I need to speak to someone higher up. This is a matter of life and death. Another pause, longer this time. Davis, you're out of line? Stand down or face charges. I don't care about charges. Davis yelled into the radio. This kid deserves a chance. He's got a family back home. He's got a life to live. Please, just let me talk to someone who can make a difference. He waited, his heart pounding, the silence on the other end of the radio deafening. He knew he was risking everything, his career, his freedom. But he couldn't stand by and watch Miller die. He had to try. He had to do something. For Miller, and for himself. The silence stretched, each second an eternity. Then, the radio crackled again. Davis, this is Colonel Henderson. I'm patched in. What's the situation? Davis took a shaky breath, trying to compose himself. Colonel, Private Miller is critically wounded, sir. Medevac was denied due to heavy fire. He won't make it without immediate extraction. He's a good soldier, sir, brave. He doesn't deserve to die out here. Colonel Henderson's voice was calm, measured. Davis, I understand your concern. But you know the risks. We can't jeopardize more lives for one. Sir, with all due respect, this isn't just about one life. It's about what we stand for. It's about honor, about duty, about not leaving a man behind. Miller fought bravely, sir. He deserves our best effort. Davis, I appreciate your sentiment, but my hands are tied. The pilots won't fly. I can't force them. Then find someone who will, sir. Please. Think of his family, his friends. Think of what it means to leave him out here to die. Davis paused, then added, Sir, if I may be so bold, I believe this situation warrants the attention of someone with higher authority. Someone who can override these restrictions. Henderson sighed. Davis, you're asking for a miracle. Maybe we need one, sir. Please, Colonel. Let me make that request. Let me try. The colonel was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "All right, Davis. I'll forward your request. But I can't promise anything. The decision ultimately rests with the highest authority." Davis's heart leaped with a flicker of hope. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." He knew it was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But it was all he had left. He looked at Miller, his face pale and drawn, his breathing shallow. He had to believe that somehow, someone would hear their plea. Someone would care enough to make a difference. Someone would save Miller's life. In the Oval Office, President John F. Kennedy sat hunched over a stack of reports, the weight of the world pressing down on him. The Vietnam War was escalating, and the news was rarely good. He rubbed his tired eyes, longing for a moment of peace. The red phone on his desk buzzed, startling him. He picked it up, his voice weary. "Yes? Mr. President," a crisp voice said. "Colonel Henderson on the line. He has an urgent matter requiring your immediate attention." Kennedy frowned. "Put him through." Colonel Henderson's voice, usually so composed, was strained. "Mr. President, I apologize for the intrusion, but we have a situation in Vietnam. A private, Robert Miller, is critically wounded and in need of immediate medevac. The local commanders have denied the request due to the intensity of the fighting." Kennedy listened intently as Henderson recounted the events: the ambush, Miller's bravery, Sergeant Davis's defiance, the pilot's refusal to fly. He heard the desperation in Henderson's voice, the plea for intervention. "Mr. President," Henderson concluded, "Sergeant Davis believes that Private Miller's life is worth the risk. He believes that we have a moral obligation to save him." "I concur, sir. However, the decision is yours." Kennedy was silent for a long moment, weighing the options. He knew the risks involved in ordering a medevac into a hot zone. He knew the potential consequences of losing a helicopter and crew. But he also knew the value of a human life, the importance of hope, the power of a single act of compassion. He thought of his own experiences in the war, the sacrifices he had witnessed, the bonds of brotherhood forged in the face of danger. He thought of his responsibilities as Commander-in-Chief, not just to win the war, but to protect the men and women who were fighting it. He made his decision. "Colonel Henderson," he said firmly, "I am authorizing the medevac. I want that soldier brought out of there, no matter the cost. Tell the pilots that this is a direct order from the President of the United States." He hung up the phone, a sense of resolve washing over him. He knew he had made a difficult and potentially unpopular decision. But he believed it was the right one. He believed that every life mattered, that every act of courage deserved to be recognized, that even in the midst of war, humanity could still prevail. He hoped it wasn't a decision he'd regret. Back in the jungle, the tension was unbearable. Miller was barely conscious, his breathing ragged. Sergeant Davis knelt beside him, holding his hand, trying to offer comfort. The firing had died down slightly, but they knew the enemy was still out there, watching, waiting. Suddenly, the unmistakable whump-whump-whump of helicopter blades filled the air. Davis looked up in disbelief. A medevac chopper was approaching, defying all odds. The helicopter swooped down, dodging enemy fire, its pilot displaying incredible skill and bravery. It touched down briefly in a small clearing, kicking up dust and debris. "Go, go, go!" Davis yelled, grabbing Miller under the arms and dragging him towards the chopper. 2 other soldiers helped, shielding Miller from the incoming bullets. The pilot kept the engine running, ready to take off at a moment's notice. The door gunner sprayed the surrounding jungle with suppressing fire, keeping the Viet Cong at bay. They managed to get Miller inside, collapsing him onto a stretcher. Davis climbed in after him, his heart pounding with relief and gratitude. The helicopter lifted off, ascending rapidly, narrowly avoiding a rocket-propelled grenade. As they flew away, Davis looked down at the jungle below, a scene of destruction and despair. He knew they had escaped death by a hair's breadth. He turned his attention to Miller, who was still unconscious. He checked his pulse, relieved to find it was still there. "Hang in there, Miller," he whispered. "You're going to be all right." He knew the battle wasn't over. Miller still needed medical attention, and they were still flying through a war zone. But for the first time in hours, Davis felt a glimmer of hope. They had a chance. Thanks to a courageous pilot and a president who cared, Miller had a chance to live. The helicopter banked sharply, heading towards the distant lights of a field hospital. They were on their way home. The field hospital was a hive of activity. Doctors and nurses rushed around, tending to the wounded. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and the sounds of moans and cries. Miller was quickly transferred to an operating room. The surgeons worked for hours, battling to save his leg and his life. Davis waited anxiously outside, pacing back and forth, his nerves frayed. Finally, a doctor emerged, his face tired but relieved. "He's going to make it," he said. "The surgery was successful. He lost a lot of blood, but he's stable now." Davis sagged against the wall, tears welling up in his eyes. "Thank God," he whispered. "Thank God." Miller spent weeks in the hospital, undergoing multiple surgeries and physical therapy. The pain was excruciating, but he was determined to recover. He had a new appreciation for life, a new sense of purpose. One day, a nurse came into his room with a stack of letters. "These are for you," she said. "They've been pouring in from all over the country." Miller opened the first letter, his hands trembling. It was from a woman in Iowa, a complete stranger. She had heard about his story and wanted to thank him for his service. She praised his bravery and wished him a speedy recovery. He read the other letters, each one filled with similar sentiments. He was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. He realized that his story had touched people, that his sacrifice had not been in vain. He also received a letter from President Kennedy, a short, handwritten note expressing his gratitude for Miller's service and wishing him well. The president wrote of the importance of courage and sacrifice, and the enduring values that defined the nation. The letter was signed simply, JFK. Miller reread the letter several times, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. He knew that he had been given a second chance, a gift he could never repay. He vowed to live his life in a way that would honor that gift, to make a difference in the world, to live with purpose and meaning. He knew he had a long road ahead, but he was ready to face it. He was alive. The news crackled over the hospital radio, a bulletin interrupting the usual daytime programming. "We interrupt this program to bring you a special report. President John F. Kennedy has been assassinated in Dallas, Texas." Miller stared at the radio in disbelief, his heart sinking. He couldn't believe it. The president, the man who had saved his life, was dead. The room fell silent as everyone listened to the details of the assassination. The shock and grief were palpable. Miller felt a profound sense of loss, as if he had lost a member of his own family. He thought back to the letter he had received from President Kennedy, the words of encouragement and hope. He realized that the president's decision to save him had been more than just a political calculation. It had been an act of humanity, an expression of his belief in the value of every human life. Now that life was gone, and Miller felt a tremendous weight of responsibility. He had been given a second chance, and now the man who had given it to him was no longer there. He vowed to honor President Kennedy's memory by living a life that would make him proud. He would dedicate himself to service, to helping others, to making the world a better place. He would become the man that President Kennedy believed he could be. The days that followed were filled with mourning and reflection. The nation was in shock, grappling with the loss of its leader. Miller shared in the grief, but he also felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that President Kennedy's legacy would live on, inspiring generations to come. And he knew that he had a role to play in carrying that legacy forward. He would be a living testament to the president's courage, compassion, and unwavering belief in the human spirit. He would not let him down. He would live a life worthy of the sacrifice that had been made for him. He would make sure that JFK's decision had not been in vain. After his discharge from the hospital, Miller returned home to Iowa, a changed man. The war had taken its toll, leaving him with physical scars and emotional wounds. But it had also given him something, a sense of purpose. He enrolled in college, determined to get an education and make a difference. He studied hard, driven by the memory of President Kennedy and the desire to live up to his expectations. He became involved in community service, volunteering at a local homeless shelter and tutoring underprivileged children. He found fulfillment in helping others, in giving back to the community that had supported him during his recovery. He also became an advocate for peace, speaking out against the war and working to promote understanding and reconciliation. He believed that war was a senseless tragedy, that there were better ways to resolve conflicts. He met a beautiful young woman named Emily, and they fell in love. She was kind, compassionate, and shared his passion for service. They married and started a family, raising their children to value education, empathy, and social justice. Miller became a teacher, dedicating his life to shaping young minds and inspiring future generations. He shared his story with his students, teaching them about the importance of courage, sacrifice, and the power of one person to make a difference. He never forgot President Kennedy, his act of kindness, and the profound impact it had on his life. He kept the president's letter framed on his desk, a constant reminder of his commitment to service and his debt of gratitude. He lived a long and fulfilling life, filled with purpose, meaning, and love. He made a difference in the lives of countless people, and he left the world a better place than he found it. He honored President Kennedy's memory by living a life that was worthy of the sacrifice that had been made for him. He was, in every sense of the word, a hero. He was a living example of how one person's decision can change the course of another's life, inspiring them to live with greater purpose. Now an old man sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. Robert Miller, a veteran of the Vietnam War, a retired teacher, a community leader, a man who had lived a life of purpose. He smiled, remembering the young, scared soldier he had once been, lost in the jungles of Vietnam, clinging to life by a thread. He remembered the ambush, the pain, the fear, the desperation. He also remembered the medevac helicopter, the courageous pilot, and the president who had made it all possible. He remembered the letter, the words of encouragement, the sense of responsibility. He had lived a long and fulfilling life, a life that had been shaped by those experiences. He had made mistakes, faced challenges, and overcome obstacles. But he had never forgotten the lessons he had learned in Vietnam, the values he had embraced, the purpose he had found. He had tried to make a difference in the world, to leave it a better place than he had found it. He had taught his students about the importance of courage, sacrifice, and service. He had volunteered his time to help those in need. He had advocated for peace and justice. He had raised a family, instilling in his children the values that he held dear. He had loved and been loved. He had lived a life that was worthy of the sacrifice that had been made for him. He looked up at the sky, a tear rolling down his cheek. He was grateful for his life, for his family, for his friends, for the opportunities he had been given. He was grateful for President Kennedy, for his act of kindness, for his unwavering belief in the human spirit. He knew that his time was coming to an end, but he was not afraid. He had lived a good life, a meaningful life, a life that had made a difference. And he knew that his legacy would live on, inspiring others to follow in his footsteps. He closed his eyes, a peaceful smile on his face. He was ready. He had lived. He had loved. He had served. He had honored the memory of John F. Kennedy. The old man's voice, raspy but firm, filled the room. He was speaking to a group of young people, students eager to learn from his experiences. Life, he said, is a precious gift. It's not something to be taken for granted. It's something to be cherished, to be lived to the fullest. He paused, his eyes twinkling. I learned that lesson in the jungles of Vietnam. I learned it when I was lying there, wounded and afraid, thinking that my life was about to end. He told them his story, the story of the ambush, the medevac, the president's decision. He spoke of the courage of Sergeant Davis, The bravery of the helicopter pilot, the compassion of John F. Kennedy. Leadership, he said, is about making difficult decisions, even when those decisions are unpopular. It's about putting the needs of others before your own. It's about standing up for what you believe in, even when it's not easy. He spoke of sacrifice, of the willingness to give up something for the greater good. Sometimes, he said, we have to make sacrifices for our country, for our community, for our families. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. He emphasized the importance of living a life of purpose, of finding something that you're passionate about and dedicating yourself to it. We all have a purpose in life, he said. It's up to us to find it and to pursue it with all our heart and soul. He looked at the young people, his eyes filled with hope. Never forget that one person can make a difference, he said. President Kennedy's decision to save my life changed everything. It inspired me to live a life of service, to make the world a better place. He smiled. You all have the power to make a difference. You have the power to change the world. Don't ever underestimate that power. Believe in yourselves, believe in your dreams, and never give up on hope. He paused, taking a deep breath. The world needs leaders, it needs people who are willing to make sacrifices, it needs people who are committed to living a life of purpose. Be those people. Be the change you want to see in the world. His words hung in the air, inspiring the young people to action. They knew that they had been given a gift, a story that would stay with them forever. They left the room, filled with hope and determination, ready to make their own mark on the world. The enduring power of one person's decision, rippling through time, touching countless lives. The story of Robert Miller, and the legacy of John F. Kennedy, would continue to inspire for generations to come.